Hey, right, I made a monumental cock-up during the filming of this video. All I can do is apologise. I carried out a firmware update on my bike cam a couple of days before filming, and what I didn't realise is that the firmware had reset some of the settings back to default, so it had recorded in 1080p. Do you remember that? 1080p instead of 4K, and it had reverted to a ridiculous 30 frames per second instead of the usual 25 frames a second. Now this causes what's known as a frame rate conflict, because I always shoot at 25 frames per second, so when you put a 30 frame per second clip into the video, you get that characteristic jumping that you may have noticed from time to time on other videos, even TV programs at times. So what I've had to do to try and mitigate this and stop it looking too bad is slow the on-bike footage down slightly to take account of those extra frames that are in. I must confess I don't know fully whether this will work until the video has been rendered and completed, by which time it'll be too late, so I won't have time to do anything else with it. But never let it be said that I didn't try. Now, on a more positive note, Oxford University recently carried out some research, and it was discovered that if you leave a like on any of my videos, it makes it up to 30% more attractive to the opposite sex. Not only that, if you subscribe to this channel as well, it makes you irresistible. So, and I'm saying this purely for your benefit, not mine, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure that all your notifications are enabled. You're welcome! Now, quite a few people have been asking me about the Royal Enfield Continental GT and when I'm going to start publishing some content on that. As I said when I introduced the bike, I actually bought it a couple of months ahead of when I'd planned to for various reasons which were contained in that video. So it's going to be a couple of weeks more yet before you see anything on the Continental GT. I've just got some other things to get through, and then hopefully we should be good to go. I'm talking to one or two companies about collaborations on this bike. I think I've got some really exciting content coming up for you this year, so please just bear with me. Right, getting back to today's video. Believe it or not, I've now had the Classic 500 for a year, and I've loved every minute of ownership. Seriously, I've never owned a bike that's stolen my heart like this little bullet has. If you remember on one of the earlier videos with this bike, I commented on the toolkit. It's got quite a comprehensive toolkit, this bike, but there was one thing missing, a C-spanner for adjusting the rear suspension, which I have to say seemed rather odd. Now, it was necessary for me to adjust the suspension after a couple of months when the springs sort of relaxed a little bit. Luckily, I do have one or two C-spanners, and the reason they'd left it out of the toolkit became very apparent to me when it came to adjustment. Because with the stock suspension, although it's not impossible, it's very difficult to adjust. The reason being that Royal Enfield have chosen to put this rather odd sort of upside down piggyback shock affair on the bike. Now, whether this additional reservoir actually gives any performance gains with this suspension, I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't like to say. And although they have sort of taken steps to hide it by painting it black, I think it looks as ugly as sin. But the main problem with it is that it's right next to the adjustment ring, so it's virtually impossible to get a standard C-spanner in there to adjust your actual suspension because it gets in the way. Which is why I think Royal Enfield have decided to leave a C-spanner out of the toolkit, because adjusting your suspension is a rather frustrating knuckle skinning endeavour. Now, the Classic 500 is, I have to say, one of the most comfortable bikes I've ever ridden, and that's probably in part due to the sprung saddle. As far as rider comfort goes, it sort of gives you a double suspension system, if that makes any sense. But as I've rolled the miles onto this bike, I think I've done about 1,500 miles so far, I've noticed bit by bit that rear suspension was slackening off. It was getting weaker. I'd adjusted it once at about 500 miles and it was getting to the stage where it needed adjusting again. The back end was starting to feel a little bit vague, and there were occasions where the bike was starting to wallow. Now, it never felt like it was getting into a situation that was dangerous or out of control. But on faster roads, long sweeping bends or even lane changes could sometimes instigate a definite wallow at the back end where the whole bike would sort of weave slightly from side to side. And I thought, rather than continuing to adjust these rear shocks until I run out of adjustment, now might be a good time to look at a positive upgrade that's going to last the life of the bike. So I got in touch with some old friends of mine at Hagen and I spoke to Dave there, and we came up with a plan. Now, Hagen have been building specialist road shocks since the 1960s, although the history of the company can be traced back much further than that. And they've been hand building super high quality shock absorbers for classic bikes and modern classic bikes, including bikes like the Bullet, for decades. In fact, they've probably got more experience building aftermarket shocks for the Royal Enfield single than any other company in existence. Now, the Bullet isn't a performance bike, it's a commuter tourer. The rear suspension for a bike like that needs to be very robust and durable. It also needs to give a good degree of comfort without compromising handling. Now, any motorcyclist that's been at it for a decade or so will know that is a very tall order from any suspension unit. And creating a package that gives the rider all those things whilst having a very simple user interface for adjustment is exactly what Hagen excel at. And what we eventually settled on was one of their sort of classic shops from their custom shop range, tailor-made to my exact requirements. Now, you can buy Hagen shocks over the counter or online, but for ultimate customer satisfaction, Hagen much prefer it if you ring them directly, and I'll leave a number in the video description down below so that they can discuss your requirements with you, take some measurements from you, and build you a shock to your exact requirements. A shock just like these. The shock body is all polished stainless steel, hand assembled and hand welded, with a slightly softer chrome plated spring. I believe all Hagen shocks are rebuildable and Hagen can carry out that servicing for you. There are no additional bells and whistles with this shock, it is simply adjustable for preload, but that custom made service means that they can give you a shock which, although simple to operate and adjust, will provide you with superlative performance compared to the OEM stock item. Now, these shocks feature a slightly softer spring but with more reliable and predictable preload adjustment built in, and superior and far better controlled damping. These shocks are not a mass-produced crowd pleaser. Each one is a one-off, custom-built shock, built for the exacting requirements of each individual rider. Now, these custom shocks come in at just over £200. Not an awful lot of money for a set of custom shocks. Although I would say that I went for the option without the shrouds to give a more sort of vintage look. The shrouds themselves add about a £16 premium onto each shock if that's the way you want to go. Now, yes, I know there are some piggyback shocks out there from certain companies that come in at about 120, 150 pounds. But believe me, as nice as they may look, they are not the same thing. They're not the same quality. Now, it is so easy to fall into the trap, as I have, of thinking that a shock really isn't worth shouting home about unless it's got all the bells and whistles. And it was my intention to make just one video on these shocks to include the review and the fitting procedure, because it is slightly different from most bikes. But once I'd got out on the open road with these shocks, I realised that that would be not only short-changing Hagen, but short-changing these shocks, because they are worth far more attention than that. So what I've decided to do, this is the main review of those videos, and I'll go on to that in a moment. I'm going to publish a separate fitting video on Friday, and then just as an extra treat, tomorrow I'm going to publish a ride video, because looking back at that 1080p footage in its native 30 frames per second, I realised just how smooth a ride these shocks give. And slowing down the frame rate as I have in this video, I don't think really does it justice. It sort of gives a false impression. I just think it's only fair to do it this way, both to give a proper detailed review of the shocks and to give a proper detailed video on how to fit them. I need to do it properly because it's worth it. It's clear to me now that the OEM shocks were adequately sprung, but they were way underdamped. So basically, when you're riding it with the OEM shocks, you're just riding on the springs and the damping isn't doing an awful lot. Now, that's great at moderate speeds on a bumpy road. It will give you that nice, squidgy, comfortable ride quality. The problem occurs when you try to change direction at speed. Now, the Bullet is not a performance machine, but that doesn't mean that you're travelling at 30 miles an hour everywhere. In modern traffic, it's necessary to keep up with the traffic, and at 50, 60 and 70 miles an hour, that's where the OEM shock started to show up its shortcomings. And decades of development and experience on Hagen's part have come into play with these new shocks. They are adjustable for spring preload only, and they only have 3 adjustment positions. Now, on paper that sounds very lackluster, which is why I underestimated them. Because the magic ingredient here is the way that Hagen go about building springs for each customer. When you ring them up, they will ask you some questions about your own weight, whether you're going to take a pillion, whether you'll be travelling with luggage. And from there, they will design the qualities of the shock to meet what it is you require from the bike. Now, those 3 adjustment points are designed for a specific reason. Minimum preload adjustment is for a rider on his own. The second preload adjustment is for the rider with luggage. And the third preload adjustment is for the rider with or without luggage and a pillion. This removes the, if you like, generic or average parameters of any shock absorber from the equation and tailors the shock to your exact requirements. Basically, Hagen build and tune the shock specifically for you. So all you need to worry about is which position to set it in for the requirements of the day. I'll be honest, all I was initially looking for was something that performed adequately but looked better than the OEM shocks, because I hated that piggyback canister. I love the Bullet as it was, and I accepted its suspension foibles, for want of a better word. What I wasn't expecting was the superior step up in performance, comfort and handling that these simple looking shocks provide. One thing that I've really prized about the Bullet from day one is the comfort in riding. I didn't want to lose that with this change in shocks, because that's what makes a bike a mile muncher. It doesn't matter how fast it can go, it's the length of time that you can comfortably stay in the saddle that matters. And I really didn't want to lose that. And right from the outset, although I knew that these springs were softer, it did feel a little bit stiffer at the back end. Now of course that's not the springs, that's the slightly more effective and controlled damping at play. And it's not until you get out on the open road, especially on some of the horrific East Yorkshire roads that I ride on, that the true benefit of that becomes apparent. The softer spring retains that ultimate feeling of comfort on bad roads or smooth roads, low speed or high. But this magic damping controls your spring weight, and what it does is it gives you a little bit more feedback through the back end. The original suspension did feel a little bit numb. You didn't really get any feedback from the back tyre, so you didn't always know what the back wheel was doing. It all felt a bit vague. These shocks instantly cured all that. For the price, I would categorise these shocks as being budget shocks, but they certainly don't act like budget shocks. They've been cleverly designed to extract every ounce of performance and comfort from the Bullet chassis. It provides you with the best of both worlds, comfort and stability in any situation, something that a lot of shocks fail to provide. You usually get one or the other. And the beauty of these shocks are that the way they're set off, the way they're programmed for the rider, you can achieve all this on minimum preload, knowing that if you need to take a pillion, you've got all that adjustment there to make the same happen with an extra load. I could see it getting to the state where with the old OEM suspension I'd basically run out of adjustment before I even considered carrying luggage or taking a pillion. Both aesthetically and performance wise, these are the perfect choice for the Bullet. They're also the perfect choice for your average rider that doesn't want to spend hours fine-tuning suspension trying to get it to where he wants it. That has all been done for you by Hagen, and it's available straight out of the box. Now these shocks are not just available for the Bullet, they do arrange to cover just about any twin shock motorcycle on the market. This is not a paid promotion, but if you'd like to know more about a set of these shocks either for the Bullet or for any other bike, give Hagen a ring, ask to speak to Dave and tell him that Uncle Stu sent you. He's a really knowledgeable guy and I'm sure he will sort you out. Also, from what I can gather, their website is undergoing a rebuild at the moment. It's offline, so that represents your best option anyway. Be sure to tune in tomorrow morning, same time, 6 o'clock, for that virtual ride at normal speed. And as I said, the fitting video for these shocks will be uploaded at 6 o'clock on Friday morning. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out, and as I said at the beginning, it will improve your sex life. So until tomorrow, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.